Welcome to TPM Vid's Disney Beat, where we talk about all things Disney. If you're new to the channel and like what you see, hit that subscribe button and click the bell icon to be notified when we upload a new video. You can also find us on all your favorite social media platforms. Over at the Disneyland Resort, we've seen many attractions come and go over the years. Although they're now pieces of Disney history, Imagineers have incorporated tributes, Easter eggs, and leftover relics of the old attractions for us to find in these new attractions. There is a lot of theme park history to explore, so let's count down 7 hidden secrets of defunct Disneyland attractions. Number 7. Mickey's Toontown just recently went through a complete overhaul, and many of the land's attractions were given some new life. Goofy's Playhouse was turned into Goofy's How-To Yard, which now features tons of interactive elements outside and in. The inside of the house was transformed into this candy ball factory, and it's just as chaotic as Goofy himself. Now, have you ever noticed that a lot of the decor and items in the house look like they're inflatable? There's a bunch of them hanging overhead, but these have nothing to do with the current reimagining of Toontown. They're actually leftover relics from the previous incarnations of the attraction. Back when Mickey's Toontown first opened in 1993, this used to be Goofy's Bounce House. It was essentially a giant bouncy castle where everything inside, from the fireplace to the couches and ottomans, were made out of inflatable plastic. It was a creative idea, but as you can see, it may not have been the safest attraction at Disneyland. I'm sure this produced many nervous parents. I'm not sure if any incidents actually occurred, but with that said, it did close in January of 2006 to make way for something a bit safer. That turned out to be Goofy's Playhouse, which ended up opening in 2007. Aside from having a couple of places to sit down, there really wasn't anything in here to keep guests occupied, but at least there was some cool new decor on the walls. To pay tribute to its former life as a bouncy house, Imagineers created all of these inflatable items to display around the house. During the most recent refurbishment, the props from 2007 were obviously recycled, and now they act as a little reminder of Toontown's past. And speaking of Toontown's past, there's another hidden tribute here in Goofy's house. So before the 2023 reimagining, the outside of Goofy's house had this garden and a little pumpkin patch that included a very particular pumpkin with glasses. Well, this pumpkin was placed here as a tribute to Disney executive Jack Lindquist, who at the time was the president of Disneyland.
This is really quite a coup for us.
He oversaw all of Mickey's Toontown, but ended up retiring in 1993, which was the same year Toontown opened. Unfortunately, the pumpkin patch was demolished during the refurbishment to make way for the climbing structure and slides. But it's not all doom and gloom. If we make our way back inside Goofy's house and head to where the baseball items are, just below it you'll find a picture with Max and PJ on Halloween. Well, if you look at the bottom of the picture on the left-hand side, you can spot the Jack Lindquist pumpkin. Before becoming Disneyland president, Jack served as vice president of marketing, and he was the one who came up with the genius idea of Disney dollars. They made their debut at Disneyland in 1987, then at Walt Disney World in 1992. They stopped printing them in 2016, but you can still use them as legal tender in the parks. I still have a few saved, and they are never leaving my site. So Jack's physical pumpkin may be gone, but his contributions to Disneyland are never forgotten. Number 6. When Disney California Adventure opened in 2001, the entrance of the park looked very different. Back then, the quote-unquote Main Street of DCA was known as Sunshine Plaza. Like the rest of the park, it celebrated everything to do with California, including having its very own Golden Gate Bridge. Since the monorail passes right through the park, Imagineers came up with this clever way to disguise the track into San Francisco's most famous landmark. Well, in the late 2000s, the park entered a $1.2 billion expansion and overhaul. This included the addition of Cars Land, a reimagined Paradise Pier, and the transformation of Sunshine Plaza into Buena Vista Street. Construction began in October of 2010, and since the park remained open, it was all done in phases. Buena Vista Street was a huge project in itself, and in summer of 2011, it was finally time for the Golden Gate Bridge to be removed. The towers ended up coming down, but they just used the red steel as a base and built the new bridge over top of it. The one that's here today is inspired by the Glendale Hyperion Bridge. You wouldn't even know this used to be the Golden Gate Bridge. Well, that's until you're on the monorail. When you're passing through Disney California Adventure and approach the park's entrance, take a peek out the window. On the ends of each side, you'll see some of the leftover red metal from the Golden Gate Bridge. The spotlights on the railings were even left in place. They literally only covered up what's visible from on stage in the park and just left the rest intact, secretly leaving this piece of DCA history behind. Disney California Adventure went 12 years without a Golden Gate Bridge until Disney brought in a new version with San Francisco Square in 2023. I mean, it was a full circle moment that no one ever expected. Number 5. Prior to Monsters, Inc. moving into the streets of Hollywoodland, this used to be home to the infamous Superstar Limo. It was an opening day attraction in 2001 that's been dubbed as one of, if not the worst Disney ride. Well, on this slow-moving journey through the glitz and glam of Hollywood, the ride featured caricature versions of many famous celebrities that somehow had ties to the Walt Disney Company. Well, since the construction of the park was severely over budget, Superstar Limo was made on the cheap. The animatronics were just basic limited motion figures. The ride was so bad and so poorly received that it closed in January of 2002, less than a year after it opened. Fast forward to January 2006 when Mike and Sully to the Rescue eventually opened, and believe it or not, the celebrity animatronics were still in the ride. Well, they made it into the ride without their heads and were fitted with some yellow suits, and Disney turned them into the CDA agents. Jackie Chan doing his karate pose was turned into the CDA agent on top of the truck, who was still doing a karate pose. The iconic pop sensation Cher was used for this CDA agent in the manhole. The hilarious Drew Carey with his fan of tickets was reused as this agent popping out of the bushes. And Whoopi Goldberg at the end of the ride became this agent getting interviewed and was left at the end of this ride. It's a clever little bit of recycling, but all I can ever think of are these headless animatronic celebrities just under these yellow suits. I mean, they are truly celebrity agents. Number 4. Everything in Frontierland feels so authentic and lived in, but it's pretty well known that parts of the land are really just pieces of an abandoned ride left to rot. A lot of people don't realize there's even an abandoned effect that still works. In July of 1956, Disneyland opened the Rainbow Caverns Mine Train, which eventually became Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland in 1960. You'd climb aboard this yellow mine train to explore the landscapes of the Wild West. The ride featured animatronics, gags, and as one of the e-ticket attractions, it was a favorite among guests. As time went on though, people began wanting more thrill rides, so Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland closed in January of 1977 to make way for Big Thunder Mountain. Now the ride covered a large footprint in Frontierland, but not all of it was used up for Big Thunder Mountain. Because of this, it was just easier to leave parts of the ride in place, like this area which used to be known as Bear Country. Every year it gets more and more overgrown, but you can see the old tunnel is still intact. At one time, the train would cross this truss bridge and you'd catch glimpses of animatronic bears going about their business. Some of the bears were fishing, and there was even a jumping fish that would come out of the water. It's this thing right here. Well, all these years later, this jumping fish effect can still be seen in the park today. All you gotta do is look for these bubbles, and if you stare long enough, the mechanical fish should jump out of the water. Now the effect does break down, so there might be times where you just see bubbles from the hoses under the water. It's still incredible though that something from the 60s is still maintained and operates today. Then just up the walkway, there's a tunnel that's boarded up, and this was also from Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. Back in the day, from here, the train would travel straight towards Rivers of America. If you look inside, you can still see some remnants of the rotting abandoned track, but there's actually more. While riding the Mark Twain riverboat, you get pretty close to what's left of the rest of the remaining tracks along the perimeter of the river. This area used to be known as Cascade Peak, and it featured some gorgeous cascading waterfalls that you would actually get to ride past. Unfortunately, the 75-foot tall peak was removed around 1998, and today we're just left with a little mound of land. It's too bad it doesn't exist anymore, but at least pieces of the track are still hanging on. Literally. To get an even better picture of things, see this section of track on a platform? Well, in this old vintage footage, you can clearly see the track and everything else in all its glory. Coming from that tunnel along the pathway, the train used to pass in the opposite direction of the Mark Twain, and today that tunnel looks like this. The rocks have been repainted to match Big Thunder Mountain, but it's remarkable that it really hasn't changed much at all. The scenery on Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland was quite stunning, and at the end, you used to pass through an indoor show scene that depicted glowing rainbow caverns. That's why on the first lift hill of Big Thunder Mountain, we passed through glowing rainbow caverns to pay tribute to Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. Number 3. A Bug's Land in Disney California Adventure opened in October of 2002, and the theming in here was top-notch. Although it was more of a mini-land, it was still quite impressive and incredibly detailed. Well, in September of 2018, A Bug's Land closed to make way for Avengers Campus, and although it's now one for the history books, pieces of A Bug's Land can still be found at Disney California Adventure. You just need to know where to look. Back in 2023, San Francisco Square brought some new life into Pacific Wharf. Since it's now themed to Big Hero 6, at the back heading towards Cars Land, you'll find the Hamada Bot Shop. Usually this is where Hero and Baymax meet, but it's also where the Big Hero 6 team builds and invents all their new high-tech gear. Well, if you peek into this garage, you can see this is where they keep everything from their tools and supplies to spare parts. Now, if we take a look at that top shelf, there's what seems to be some sort of cover from a control panel, but it's not just any cover. It's actually the control panel cover from Flix Flyers in A Bug's Land. You can see the Flix Flyers logo and all the ride controls are still labeled. It's actually kind of cool that something like this lived on and turned up 5 years after the ride closed. It's obvious that Flix Flyers is now a Disney ride of the past, but it's not completely defunct. When the ride closed in 2018, Disney sent it back to the manufacturer in Italy for it to be rethemed. When it was shipped back to Anaheim, it became Inside Out Emotional Whirlwind. It's the only ride from A Bug's Land that actually got repurposed, but there are still a few more surviving pieces from the land. So here in Avengers Campus, the Web Slingers show building used to be the home of It's Tough to Be a Bug. Inside the Web Slingers pre-show room, you're gonna find the Gear Grabber claw machine. Amongst all the other goodies in the machine, hidden inside, you'll find a pair of 3D bug eye glasses from It's Tough to Be a Bug. Then while you're on Web Slingers, the candy corn eating caterpillar Heimlich is actually on the ride. Well, it's a piece of him. As your Web Slinger vehicle leaves the load station, keep an eye out for this just before the first screen. The red object with wheels is actually the chassis from one of the Heimlich trains. It's a little blurry, but you can still make out that it says Heimlich. To see it, you need to be in either row 1 or 3. Row 2 or 4 don't face this way, but it's fun to know that pieces of A Bug's Land still live on at Disney California Adventure. Number 2. The Adventureland Treehouse is one of the best reimagined attractions we've seen in a long time. It feels like classic Disneyland all over again. And honestly, we have Tarzan to thank for that. Prior to becoming Tarzan's Treehouse in 1999, there were serious discussions about completely removing the treehouse since it wasn't as popular as it once was. Imagineer Tony Baxter had the idea to turn it into Tarzan's Treehouse, and just like that with that IP tie-in, the treehouse was saved. Lately, Disney has been very IP-focused, so the Adventureland Treehouse is such a breath of fresh air. Imagineers took inspiration from the original Swiss Family Robinson treehouse that opened at Disneyland in 1962. Not only was the treehouse trimmed back to its original footprint, but so much new charm was infused into the attraction. We even got the return of the Swiskapoka tune with a brand new arrangement. Now, Tarzan's Treehouse used to have a little musical tribute to Swiskapoka, but today in Mother's Music Den, you can find a tribute to Tarzan's Treehouse. So when you look around the room, you'll see a bunch of books. One of them is actually the Swiss Family Robinson, which pays tribute to the first version of the Treehouse. Then on that little table, you'll find a copy of Tarzan of the Apes, which obviously pays tribute to Tarzan's Treehouse. Now, Mother's Music Den used to be the scene where Jane draws Tarzan. It's ironic that the Tarzan tribute is here in this room, because apparently it was said that one of Jane's books was actually a copy of the Swiss Family Robinson. And speaking of Jane, when you first enter the treehouse, you'll come across the family's pet ostrich. It's based off the pet ostrich in the Swiss Family Robinson novels, but the only difference here is that Imagineers named her Jane after Jane Porter from Tarzan. So if you were ever a little sad to lose Tarzan's treehouse, don't you worry, because Tarzan and Jane are both still in the park. Number 1. There's nothing quite like taking a Grand Circle tour on the Disneyland Railroad. When you're approaching the New Orleans station, there's this little display for the Mardi Gras Supply Company. With its beads, masks, and flowers, it sets the mood as you enter New Orleans. But some of these props were actually recycled from a now defunct parade. In 2001, Disney's Eureka, a California parade opened along with Disney California Adventure.
If you want to experience the energy and excitement of California, Disney's Eureka, a California parade, is a concentrated blast of music, dance, and artistry.
There was not one Disney character in sight, but since the parade celebrated everything to do with California, from major cities to different cultures, there was a walking Golden Gate Bridge. So who needs Mickey Mouse? But honestly, the floats themselves were quite beautiful. The first major unit celebrated Hispanic California, and the float was filled with tons of colorful flowers. While Disney's Eureka wasn't the most well-received parade, and it closed in the summer of 2002. By now, we know Disney loves recycling, so they removed the flowers from the float and used them as set decoration for New Orleans Square. Now, I'm not sure where the Burger King head and the other two came from, but those flowers are definitely from Eureka. Over the years, the props have been rearranged, but just remember that every time your train pulls into New Orleans, you're passing by another piece of Disney California Adventure history. So out of all the defunct attractions and rides from this list, which one would you bring back? I'd love to know. Leave a comment down below to start a conversation, and don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed the video.